Well, hello, everybody. It's David Leis here, your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier. It's June the 5th, 2025, the year of our Lord. And I am so grateful that you can all join us today for this program. We appreciate your comments. Good afternoon, Prairie, as we have so many of our regulars like Prairie for joining us. And we do appreciate your comments. We're getting thousands of comments across the programs, and we do appreciate that feedback. And one thing that I'm noticing is that we have quite an audience, really from coast to coast, as they say, and so that kind of feedback is much appreciated. And I'll tell you why. One of the reasons is because when I am able to see these comments, I think it says that we're trying to serve you as an audience with information and principled insight in terms of public policy and what's going on in our world, but also, frankly, those comments give me a kind of a sense of hope that people do care. A nation is many things. It's not just simply the land, it's the people that draw together in terms of that common vision of building an incredible country. So we need to be able to take heart that there's many people that care, and you illustrate that wonderfully. So Robert says hello from Mississauga. Yes, no census left. We need everyone's participation. And Matthew says hello. Absolutely. So there's a lot of news headlines. So much we our heart goes out to the people affected by forest fires or evacuees across our country. It is hard to imagine the scale of those forest fires, and there's a picture of the people that are working together to try to mitigate them and manage them under some very difficult circumstances. So bravo on them. In other news, we noticed that the Bank of Canada is holding pat on their 2.75% interest rate as they literally walk the line. There's Tiff Macklin walking a line of sorts as he goes into the offices, as he's got a difficult job now in terms of trying to, well, manage core inflation, but also we're in a situation where we are presented with many uncertainties around tariffs and trade matters. So we shall talk about that later. Canada Post still has their deal in the mail, so to speak. The Jobs Minister Patty Hajad is called on Canada Post and the union to come together and return to the bargaining table, so to speak, as they talk about arbitration or maybe even a process outside of the forced or binding arbitration option. We've all heard it this last week about the U.S. placing steel and aluminum tariffs of some 50% on producers in Canada. So that's certainly a very significant development, and we'll figure out how that unfolds, and that's part of our conversation. We also am very interested to notice a story about as the United States deals with the millions of illegal immigrants in their country. That U.S. crackdown is sending a surge of refugees into Canada. So it's very interesting that the Canadian government has probably responded in part to that with, I believe it's Bill C-2, a Stronger Borders Act. So we'll talk about that as well. I want to highlight as well that at Frontier we've released this last week our international housing affordability report. We looked at 95 markets worldwide, including a number of them in Canada. Be sure to look at that report. It was done. The lead on that is senior fellow Wendell Cox, and there's some very powerful discussions about that because housing affordability, as you may know, is there it is. There's some outcomes in terms of housing affordability across some key larger markets. The bad news is that it's a train wreck, as you can see in terms of Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Ottawa, much less so, much more affordable in other markets, including Calgary and Edmonton, and even more affordable in other smaller markets. So be sure to look at that report. That's foundational to our lives. And in the meantime, let's all keep I was going to say it's a Freudian slip. Let's keep our elbows up or our fingers crossed, depending on what you prefer, that the Edmonton Oilers, as we look at the Stanley Cup, actually bring the Stanley Cup and named in the honor of Lord Stanley, that they can bring it home to Canada. Wouldn't that be something after, what is it, a 25-year drought or something? But the Edmonton Oilers look pretty sharp there in their their jerseys. So, anyways, we'll keep tuned to that. And in the meantime, we all want this government, federally, provincially, wherever they are, to succeed as they are helping to facilitate and work with everybody across this country to renew and move forward this country. We know we've had stagnant economy the last 10, 11 years. We've got a lot of major challenges. If you want to learn more about that, just pay attention to the interview that I had with Matthew Lau, a financial analyst who sums it up in terms of many different slides. It's not just one data point, it's many, many data points. And there's no senses left. Go Oilers, go. Way to go. So we want our governments to succeed. And on that note, they met in Monday in Saskatoon. You can see a lot of pictures here of the group meeting around a grand circle there as the Prime Minister chairs those meetings with the premiers. They came together, they saw, they talked, they visited, they kibitzed, and they issued a lot of different communiques. The theme was building one Canadian economy. Imagine that. I thought we had one, but we don't. Building one Canadian economy, taking down those barriers. We know that we're kind of in trouble as we look at moving things forward. There's Prime Minister Mark Carney with Premier Wab Kinew from Manitoba, probably talking about utility corridors going across the west to Hudson's Bay. Who knows? Because Wab Kinew, that's certainly one of the concepts he's been pitching. As they talk about projects, so-called nation-building projects that are very important. And so I have a question to my two esteemed guests, and they're going to be joining us now. And I'm delighted to welcome back. I have Bruce Pardy, who's on faculty at Queen's University, an all-around good guy. I like Bruce in terms of his incredible insights across all kinds of areas. So a warm welcome to you, Bruce.
Thanks, David. Nice to be with you.
And warm welcome to you, the Honorable Dan McTeague. And Dan, I tell you, you were a former Liberal and you've got a lot of history, and you're also the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. So a warm welcome to you, Dan.
Great to be here, and thank you for having me. Great to join, Bruce.
So, gentlemen, I want to ask you, maybe Bruce, you want to go first. What came out of these meetings? Is it substantive? Do you think that we're making progress to move forward and build one Canadian economy? What's your quick assessment on this?
No, this is the old ordinary Canadian game. Governments don't build economies.
They don't build
governments
economies.
do not build economies. If the governments in this country wanted to build a Canadian economy, what they would do is get out of the way. What was discussed, what Prime Minister Carney was talking about at the press conference and so on, is governments taking the thing in their own hands. He talked about government projects and government resources and government purposes and government criteria. This is the managerial state in action. This is not a free economy. This is not capitalism. If you really wanted to build a capitalist economy that was prosperous, it would be very easy in the technical sense. All you would need to do is get rid of a whole lot of things that government does. Instead, they're talking about how to build things themselves. You can see that with the pipeline talk, the energy corridor talk. You can hear that with the housing. I mean, Carney wants the government to build houses. Okay, these are the kinds of reasons that Canada is in the state that it's in. We in this country, especially our leaders, seem to believe that in order for economies to thrive, the government has to have its hands on the wheel. And that's exactly the opposite way it should be. In order for this to work, governments have to get out of the way. They have to make themselves vastly smaller. They have to come to a different understanding of what commercial activity is about. And that is nowhere on the horizon. All of this talk about projects that together we're going to build is completely off on the wrong path. And the provinces have forever been talking about lowering their trade restrictions between them. forever. We had a constitutional, well, we still have a constitutional provision in the Constitution Act 1867, which says there will be no trade barriers between provinces. And the Supreme Court a little while ago said, well, sorry, that's not what it means. So we've been going backwards, and whatever you heard at the Saskatchewan meetings doesn't matter a hill of beans.
Wow. There you have it from Bruce Pardy. And I want to quote him, it doesn't mean a hill of beans, because government, the understanding that they're the drivers, is centrally wrong. What's your sense of this, Dan?
Yeah, I'm with Bruce on this, and I have a feeling this is more theater than it is, in fact, practical or necessary. Look, the federal government needs to stick to its knitting. It needs to produce a budget. It needs to produce a plan, not just a throne speech about talking about trinkets and wonderful ideas that you have. It needs to come face to face with the fact that we have seen an unbelievable decline in our quality of life and standard of living over the past decade. Now, if the attempt was to show that this is somehow different, and that these kind of meetings are about a gab fest about what everybody wants, come to the table with the federal government serving as a head waiter, to use an old expression, then that's fine. But I don't think coming out of this, there's anything that is substantively different than what we saw going into it, other than for the first time the Premier's meeting with the Prime Minister. And, again, the malaise that we face, certainly brought to the forefront by Donald Trump, has been percolating for quite some time. We accepted this for about 10 years. I'm surprised that you didn't talk about the Great Reset or Build Back Better and other silly slogans that have got us into such a significant amount of trouble. But no one is addressing the fundamentals. Mark Carney is a former bank governor, whether it's good or bad, in Canada and Britain. He's got a $70 billion cost to service the debt that this country has accumulated. He's planning to put more in there. How are we supposed to manage as an economy when you're now saying, the only way in which our number one resource sector is going to be able to survive is by decarbonizing? And this is a very controversial stuff that's being done. I suspect that what we're seeing here is, a lot of nice words, but at the end of the day, they're completely meaningless, and they're not addressing the crisis, the economic crisis the country and crisis in a number of other areas is currently facing. And so, I expected more from this, but I heard a lot of stuff about what we can and should do, but nothing in terms of a decisive plan. More importantly, I don't think any of us have any clue as to how the economy is going to look this time next year. The fact is, we do need to address some pretty significant fundamental issues on economics, because everywhere I turn, the jobs picture is not good, the housing picture is not good, affordability on food, on fuel, etc., is still taking away pretty much the stopping the purchase power of every Canadian in this country.
Okay, well said, Dan and Bruce. And I note and underline that we need to, if I heard you correctly, Dan, get the fundamentals right. And I think that's almost like the paradox of the situation with that it's a very powerful symbol, the picture of all those leaders sitting around a centralized table. And kind of the assumption there, Bruce, is that they're kind of in charge and they're going to move things forward. And we don't kind of get almost the nature of our nation, that our nation is built on enabling freedom of the markets, freedom of individuals to be innovative and to move our economy forward. And then, ironically, paradoxically, the government is in the way. Any further comment, Bruce?
No, well, that's completely true. I agree with that characterization. And it's also, it's a round table, but there's also a head of the table, right? The Prime Minister is at the head of the table, and the relationship has become almost one of parent and child. The federal government is the parent, and the provinces are all the children. And that's actually not the way it was conceived.
That's right.
Provinces are supposed to be sovereign within their areas of jurisdiction. And the federal government is not supposed to be there to interfere in those areas. And yet things have evolved so that it now seems to be almost an accepted idea that the federal government has its paws in everything. It has its paws in healthcare. It has its paws in higher education. It has its paws in this, that, and the next thing. And there's no sign of any serious pushback to that, partly because the provinces have been bribed. I mean, the federal government has a role in healthcare because the provinces take federal money and they don't want to say no. And that's the condition of taking the money. So you have, instead of an equal relationship between each province and the federal government, you now have essentially a supervisory relationship. The federal government thinks it's there to supervise the way the provinces behave, and that from a provincial point of view, from the point of view of the citizens of each province, and especially the provinces in the West, that situation is intolerable.
Dan, your comment, you're a former Liberal MP and leader. Should we be getting away from metaphors like elbows up to paws off for the federal government, Dan? Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I mean, look, this looks a lot like even before my time in politics. We would have to remind ourselves of bigger than big government. We'd have to remind ourselves of summit type of executive federalism, and that's exactly what's taking place here, and is incongruent, I think, with the respect of the various regions of the country. But more importantly, this says nothing about a game plan, an action plan. No one's really coming out with saying, hey, what we're going to do. And I think it's very obvious. Quebec obviously has a financial, so is Ontario, a financial problem. It's a growing problem. We have an equalization problem in this country, which is basically leading to significant unfairness. We have concerns about how we're going to be able to respond to what is happening south of the border, while at the same time reaching back out to the trading partners to say, yeah, we can do something very quickly. But it's not going to happen overnight. And more importantly, giving the impression, while things are sinking, that somehow just because you replace the captain, that the ship is fine. We're still in the same course we have been for some time. And I think for that reason, what I saw there was more of a gab fest. That might be great when you're doing boardroom executive meetings and things like that, but it doesn't address the real fundamental crisis that the country is currently facing, as I said earlier. And it really means that we need to hear something more concrete. Mark Carney's been basically tap dancing around what he wants to do. He's not telling people about his ambition on net zero. He's not telling it if there's going to be a sea lane change between himself and the previous Trudeau Liberal government on a whole host of files. And if we don't hear that, then it's, meet the new boss, same as the damn old boss.
Okay, wow. So I would just want to pursue that a little bit with you, Dan. Then we've heard a lot of talk. It was enunciated by King Charles III, or is it the second? I mixed this up. King Charles III, I believe it was, who talked as from the throne speech that Canada should become, there he is, a energy superpower. So what do you think of that statement? How do you interpret this type of language? Does it mean anything, or is it just more of the same? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, I mean, the throne speech means nothing. It's absolutely, you're going to try to parse what someone says and how many times they say it and what is mentioned, what's not mentioned. No, it comes down to what the government actually plans to deliver in terms of legislation, as well as how it wants to conduct itself, in terms of its very limited role from a fiscal perspective. And we need to talk about, undoing some of the major damage that's been done to the Federation over the past decade. And I can say that with absolute certainty, people may say, yeah, it's new, it's not Trudeau. To use the expression, he was a goof. This guy's a lot smarter. I'm not seeing a lot of things that demonstrate a deviation. In fact, it's all the same group of people. He's brought people with him who are the net zero, gang of the past decade, including his new chief of staff, his wife, of course, involved with Eurasia. I'm very focused on that because I think the fault line for Canada is that it sacrificed energy affordability, energy availability, energy supply to the rest of the world. And that's what's made us so vulnerable, not just to Donald Trump, but that's what's made us economically weak.
Okay, because that's a foundational part. Like if you don't have affordable, dependable, reliable energy, you're kind of hooped because that drives everything, manufacturing, agricultural services, everything, right?
Jobs as well, yeah.
So Bruce, is Dan being a little bit cynical here? I mean, come on. I mean, I know that you've said this is a lot of theater as well, but surely we can rebuild this country. I mean, or is this, where do we go from here then?
Listen, if anything, Dan is being too kind.
Thank you, Bruce.
Right? When Carney talks about our energy superpower, I mean, that phrase might be designed to please everybody because everybody will misunderstand what he means. He doesn't mean that we're going to start exporting all our oil through pipelines. He means an energy superpower that's consistent with his net zero vision. I mean, he talked about building a pipeline to carry only decarbonized oil. I mean, do we appreciate what that means? It means you have to build, carbon sequestration facilities that are massively uneconomic. Will never be done by the private sector unless there's some kind of political reason to do so.
So I just want to mention here, we have to say goodbye to our dear friend, Dan McTeague. Thank you very much for joining us, Dan, as your
Go Train takes precedence.
Good to see you, Dan.
All the best with your journey. So just to pick up on that point, Bruce, it's interesting you mentioned something that maybe is got a particular detail to understand here. You mentioned about carbon sequestration. I mean, these are complicated, big plans to literally take carbon dioxide that's produced from the oil production and put it into the ground.
Yeah.
And that somehow that will enable us to move forward with oil production. And
it's a boondoggle. It's a boondoggle. It's ridiculous. There's all kinds of oil being produced and sold all over the world that is not subject to these kinds of constraints. Anything we do in Canada this way is simply a cost with no benefit. All you're really doing is handcuffing your own industry and your own country.
Yeah, so, really under a ideology that says carbon dioxide is a
exactly.
Pollutant, right?
I mean, so in other words, what we have here is not a turning of the page. This is more of the same stuff that we've seen for the past decade. And anybody who thinks that this somehow is a new era with a new prime minister is reading things into it that are not there.
Okay. Interesting. So what do you think about that? I just finished the conversation with Dan McTeague, former Liberal MP, and now with Bruce Pardy about what's happening here coming out of the so-called Building One Canadian Economy Summit that was held in Saskatoon on Monday. What do you think? The audience is buzzing with great comments, and we so much appreciate them. It's interesting. Sheridan says it's more political theater. I said on one of previous shows, Carney will string along Danielle Smith to keep her calm. Nothing will get built. Productivity and competition are a sin in Canada, sadly. Wow, what a comment. And so I do want to just build a little bit about the whole metaphor of theater. And I don't know if you're familiar with this as an audience, but I've had the pleasure of being able to see in the Japanese context what is known as kabuki theater. And it's quite an ancient art form that goes back several thousand years, where persons have kind of elaborate costumes and face masks, and they go through a very particular stylized approach to presenting story. And it's almost surreal, really. And it has great meaning, but it's everybody understands that it's kind of theater. It is clearly showing kind of an image of a story that is in the mind, and so it's not really realistic. And so that was kind of, and I don't mean this in some trivial way, but is that part of what we're seeing here, Bruce, is kind of a political theater when these leaders get together and they meet around a big table, they have these conversations, and what they're doing is really more theater than substantive. And I don't want to sound overly cynical because I know that you have to meet and talk about different things at a certain level. But I don't know, Bruce, is that kind of where you're at then? Is that this truly is theater?
Well, yes, to a certain extent, it absolutely is. I mean, certainly the words that are used and the messages that are massaged are designed to be received by audiences who want different things, right? So you don't want to offend any of the audiences. You want them all to think that they're on your side. You're on their side. So you shouldn't read too much into the messaging. On the other hand, there's also an element of this that these people, some of them anyway, are really going to believe in. And by that I mean some of these leaders will absolutely believe in the idea that their job is to manage the country and manage the economy.
Oh,
Because they are managers through and through. That's what they think government is for. I mean, Mark Carney was the governor of two central banks, and that's a managerial job. You have manage inflation, you manage money supply. This is a deeply held belief in what the role of government is, and the belief in that role. And this is not limited to Canada, but it's maybe more intense in Canada than anywhere I can think of. But this is part of the reason why we're at where we're at. And the solution that's being pursued is more and so-called better management, instead of deciding that management was a bad idea in the first place.
okay. So I like what you're saying, Bruce, in the sense that you're really inviting us to look at this through a much more thoughtful lens and say the very assumptions of a lot of these meetings may be incorrect, that government is not the centerpiece to building the economy. They're part of the problem.
And
So what
yeah.
really should their role be? Like, is there a kind of a solution that you'd recommend from a policy point of view to kind of enable us as a country to move forward? I mean, we
Right.
really want our country to succeed. We want every Canadian to go forward. And what can government be doing then to help us move forward then? What is
Right.
the
Well,
solution?
so very well put. And so let me try and put it this way. We think that the job of government is to set policy, and we'd like the policy to be good policy and not bad policy. And in a way, where we're at is a function of a whole lot of bad policy over a long period of
Mhm.
time. Right?
Indeed.
And so we'd like our governments to set better policy. Okay. Let me reframe that. The problem is not bad policy. The problem is policy. The problem is the idea that governments set policy, because what, after all, is policy? Policy is just a set of rules that tell people what to do.
Mhm.
And we have given our bureaucrats and our politicians the power to make policies, that is, to make rules to tell us all what to do. And the very simple way forward is to say, you know what, that's not a good idea. We don't want our bureaucrats and our politicians making rules about what we can do. Instead, they should be facilitating the economy so that people can go out and make investments and build things and sell things on their own, in their own self-interest, with their own property, and not be interfered with. That's the way you build a prosperous economy. And the powers that be in this country do not and will not accept that idea.
Okay, so there's been a lot of interesting comments from our audience. One of them was from Timothy Jones, who said, less government. Is that what you're getting at?
That's what I am getting at. Yeah. Now, yes, and the bottom line is absolutely yes, but I mean it in not just in a quantity way. I mean, we need that too. Our
Yeah.
governments
Yeah.
are way too big, but it's not just a matter of cutting it back. It's a matter of adopting a different idea about what the government is for. And the government
Mhm.
has a role, right? The government has a role in setting sort of basic rules and principles to keep us all from the violence of each other, and so on. I mean, you don't want no government, but
Mhm.
you want an awful lot less government, both in size and in
Mhm.
role, than what we have right now.
Right on. So let's empower the Canadian people. Let's empower businesses, the private sector, the community to succeed. So I'm talking with Bruce Pardy about the situation that we have at hand coming out of Saskatoon and the summit there. Please encourage people to, well, take part in this information, this discussion. I think it's frankly very important. I know that we're getting a lot of great comments from people about this kind of discussion and the value of it holds to you. So please share it. Please like it. I mean, that helps the quote algorithm move forward. So one of the things I find a little bit confusing, and because sometimes people think this is a partisan discussion. No, it's just the opposite. We're talking about the principles of building a better country. And what I find a bit confusing is that the response by different premiers who've been kind of at bit of loggerheads has been kind of cautiously optimistic, maybe even a bit positive. Like, for example, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe called this meeting a generational opportunity. In fact, that's a key phrase that kept repeating. I'm sure you noticed that too. A generational opportunity for Canadians, while Manitoba's Wab Canoe noted that it's also a generational opportunity for some of the poorest communities in our country to move forward. Even Alberta Premier Danielle Smith expressed cautious optimism the process will bear fruit for her province. So, I find that a little bit confusing. So, are they kind of buying into this kind of way of thinking that you're cautioning us not to fall in love with, Bruce?
Could be. Sounds like it. I
It
mean,
could be.
so Premier Smith recently sent a letter to Prime Minister Carney with 9 demands, essentially,
Yes.
that for policy changes that the federal government needed to make in order to make Alberta happy. And they were reasonable demands. It was, get rid of the tanker ban, emission caps, pipelines, single-use plastics. All those things should be fixed or eliminated. I don't disagree with any of that list, but it's a very narrow way to see the problem. Again, what you're doing is asking the federal government to make changes to its short-term policies that could be changed if they were changed, could simply be changed back in 3 or 5 years, or certainly with a different government or a different prime minister. In other words, what the politicians in this country are not doing is confronting the very deeply embedded structural problems in this country, in the way we think about government, in the way the Constitution is, in the relationship between the federal and provincial governments. There are problems all the way down. There are turtles all the way down. And to think that this can be fixed by a simple adjustment of policy in the short term is setting you up for tragedy, because that will be very short-lived, and it will sooner or later, probably sooner, revert to the norm. So, and this is one of the reasons why, at this moment, Alberta, the potential for the Alberta separation is the thing on the table, because only that, and maybe Saskatchewan too, who knows? But that is the movement that is saying to the country, people, there is something fundamentally wrong here. And unless we get the attention of the people who lead us to take that seriously, and they have not and will not, then we're going to have to do something on our own.
Okay. Well, so there you have it from Bruce Pardy. I think some very wise insights that surely should guide our perspective on what's happening today in terms of both our responsibility, but what is the significance of the moment today. So I'm hearing a lot of comments and seeing a lot of incredible questions here. It's interesting. I'm just going back up here, but Kenzie, I believe, refers to an interesting comment here. I'm just trying to see that up above, where Kenzie refers to, I believe, how Alberta is really trying to find its way here. And it's interesting, Bruce, you said the last time that we spoke on this program that, interestingly enough, Alberta seems to be a point of hope to kind of move our country forward. What did you mean by that?
I mean, at the moment, the potential for Alberta separation is the best chance Canada has to fix itself. Now, I think Alberta should act in its own interests and save itself. But by doing that, it has the potential for causing a political earthquake to the country that might either cause a kind of domino effect or a cascade, and or it might cause the powers that be to reassess what's happening. Because as soon as you create an existential threat to the country, then the people who have status in the country are forced to look at things again. But the potential for passing a referendum in Alberta is at the moment the best shot going. And I don't know what the chances of that are. I'm not in Alberta. I've talked to a lot of people in Alberta who are adamantly in favor of it. I don't know what the numbers are. I've seen polling suggesting it might be this or that. I think it's within reach. I don't know if it'll happen or not, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the chances are. It's still the best shot right now.
Okay, isn't that interesting? What do you think about that, audience? It's fascinating that Bruce's insight is that Canada has some really significant structural challenges, and that the way that we save ourselves is ironically through pathways like Alberta to be able to kind of shake us up and get us back on track. So, in many ways, Bruce, it's fascinating how you articulate these issues, because it, in my mind, harkens back to the founding speeches of this country, and I encourage people to look them up. There's inspiring principles that were about bringing those colonies together to form a greater federation. And the federal government was created by those colonies, not the other way around, as you were alluding to.
Well,
Yeah.
yes and no. I'm not sure if that stands up to the light of day. We'd certainly like to think that that is the nature of the situation.
Mhm.
But there's also another story to be told, perhaps, which is, this was built as a colony. This was the colony left over after the American Revolution. And the people who did
Oh,
not want to be free decided they wanted to be subjects still, and either stayed here or came up from the 13 colonies to stay under the thumb of the king
you're
and
the loyalists.
the loyalist. And so, Alberta as a province, Saskatchewan. I mean, so you can think of Canada as a colony serving Great Britain, and you can think of Alberta and Saskatchewan as colonies serving Central Canada. I mean, that's one way to frame the history and the origin of those provinces, and that
Interesting.
sort of still remains today. If you look at equalization, you look at interference in natural resources. I mean, Alberta, in a sense, is the cash cow of Confederation,
Mhm.
and those people who have power in the Confederation are not going to be open to the proposition that the arrangement has to be fixed or changed to something else, because that means that the way it's been happening for so long can't carry on. The rest of Canada, and especially the federal government, is not going to be favorably disposed. Let's say Alberta passes a referendum and gets to the threshold of saying, right, we're leaving, let's have a negotiation.
Mhm.
Okay. The powers that be are not going to simply say, oh, you passed a referendum. Okay, then, away you go. Because that is going to threaten the existence of the thing that they have. So the people in Alberta, should be aware that what this potentially invites is a kind of political revolution, nothing less than a political revolution. And one of the things I've been suggesting that they should try not to do in approaching this question, if I can put it this way, I've suggested to them that they try not to be too Canadian about it, in the sense that thinking of being well-meaning and naive and expecting everybody to act in good faith and to be to avoid conflict. No. This is going to be a conflict. I don't mean a violent conflict. I mean a political conflict. And that's the kind of thing that we need in this country. This country needs disruption because it is too complacent and is traveling backwards, and nobody wants to confront that problem.
Wow. So this is, your head may be spinning as mine is a little bit, Bruce, in the sense that these are very significant points that you've weighed in on. One would be, let's all realize that historically Canada has continued on almost with a colonial mindset. We haven't
Correct.
fully grown up as a self-governing nation, if I'm
Right.
getting you.
Yep.
And so we were the British colony, and now we've substituted, well, frankly, the United States is kind of a colonial master. Heaven forbid, I don't mean that in some unpatriotic manner, but the reality is that we're joined at the hip with the United States. This whole idea of Well, elbows up is nonsense. It shouldn't be a message of fear. It
Yeah,
should be, how do we not only work with allies such as the United States, but how do we grow up? So let's do the basics well. Let's get our economy freed up. Let's be a full partner with NATO instead of a NATO laggard. Let's grab a hold of our rights and traditions. Let's celebrate Sir John A. and our Canadian identity and act like a real nation. Is that
sure.
another way to say what we're talking
Yeah,
about,
well,
Bruce?
so yes, yes, sure. But let's try a third way. So for a long time, uh, we've been um, well, I was going to say cheating a little bit. I don't really mean it that way. I mean we've been advantaged by the fact that we're right next to the United States.
Mhm.
We've
Yeah.
leaned on them for economy and trade and so on. We've leaned on them for military protection. And
Mhm.
here's the kind of, Canadian schizophrenia, if you like, the political or cultural schizophrenia. On the one hand, we're dependent upon the US. And on the other hand, we're built to oppose them, which is where all this ridiculous, elbows up stuff comes from. Because the origin
Mhm.
of Canada, Canada exists, if you like, to oppose the US. Because we don't want to be revolutionaries. We want to be subjects. So you guys, go off and do that thing. We don't support you. So we are inclined as Canadians to be morally superior, to feel morally superior to the Americans, because we don't want
Mhm.
that rubbish. On the other hand, we depend on them for economy, for protection, and so on. And so
Mhm.
we have this love-hate relationship, and we have never really grown up. We're the little brother, and as a little brother, we're allowed to criticize them and yet take the goods. And the big
Yeah.
brother might actually be getting to the point of saying, all right, enough. Either grow up and come with us, or we're coming after you. And I don't know, I don't mean that literally, but I
Yeah.
but I mean at a certain point, you've got to grow up and take the world as it is and stop taking shortcuts.
Okay. So speaking of shortcuts, and I think it's a very intriguing analogy, and I'm curious what the audience you think about that little brother, big brother kind of dynamic. Is the whole issue of the recent announcement from the United States about 50%, these are hard-hitting tariffs on steel and aluminum. And I look at this and I think, wow. And we've talked about this many times on this program, including with you, Bruce,
Yep.
is that we've got a whole series of tariff plays right around the world. They're trying to reset the tariff system or world trade system, pardon me, around the world, rightly or wrongly. You can agree with it or not, but they want fair trade. They want open trade, fair trade. And despite what you read in the legacy media, that is their so-called goal. And so in that context, we've got Canada sitting there literally on the yellow chairs there in the White House.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
countries like the UK, among others, have the trade deals.
Yep.
And meanwhile, we're their most significant trading partner. Now it's second to Mexico. We don't have a deal, and we are exposed. We are, yeah, there with our fists up now, with elbows up. I'm not sure what the analogy is now,
Right.
but we are vulnerable. And I tell you, as a country, is I'm reading this right. Ironically, the UK has a deal. We don't. We're exposed, or I think we seem to be quite vulnerable. This is a historic fork in the road, isn't it, Bruce? Where we
Yes.
decide whether we're going to
Yes.
grow up as a nation or not.
Yes, but you see, absolutely. But that goes back to your question about the Saskatchewan meeting. Note that none of the things that you just mentioned were discussed at the Saskatchewan meeting. They have their heads in the sand. They are not confronting the actual problems that the problems from which this country suffers. And Canada has been I use the word cheating, has been cheating on trade with the US, I think, for a while. We have enormous tariffs on certain things. We think we need to protect our industries, certain kinds of industries, from the Americans. You know, cultural industries and airlines and mobile providers and supply management for farm products and so on. All of these things are protectionist. Now, I'm not saying the US doesn't have protectionist forces in it as well. They do. But for some reason, we carry this attitude that we are entitled to access American markets because we're Canada, but you can't come in here because we have to protect ourselves because we're small, right? Those two things are not consistent. You either believe in free trade with the Americans or you don't. And if you're getting tariffs in response now, well, then how about you respond instead of putting tariffs in response on your own people? How about you say, you know what? You got a point. We're going to lower all the trade restrictions on your guys and let's have a better trade relationship because we hold a lot of the blame for the situation that the two of us are in now. And that might get us to a better arrangement with the U.S. that might save us from all the trouble that's coming down the pike now.
Very well said, Bruce. So this is quite a significant conversation, I think, and our audience, I think, is agreeing here that we're onto something. Um, so I want to just, this has been quite a conversation as we kind of move towards our end point. I want to ask you about one of the challenges here. There's two ones that I want to underline specifically. The one is about the whole notion of special interests
Sure.
and the challenges of what are called concentrated benefits and dispersed costs. The whole notion that special interests love, like parasites, thriving on these concentrated benefits,
Yeah.
thriving off the largesse of the government while the rest of us pay for it,
Yep.
whether it's in dollars, pennies, or millions or billions.
Yep.
So I want to talk about special interests, and then I want to talk about China.
Okay.
Because that came up in our chat here.
Yeah.
So let's talk about special interests. So one of them has been, well, the whole paradox that, the theme of Saskatoon was all about one economy for Canada. And meanwhile, we don't have free trade. So it begs the question, why is that? And then on top of that, we've had almost a rhetoric of a de facto veto that a number of First Nation leaders have articulated now, because it's important to work with everybody, including First Nations. We know that.
Mhm.
But the assertion has been by some, you don't want to generalize too much, but the assertion is you can't do any of this stuff or in terms of moving forward to expedite projects in an efficient, fast manner without having a consensus with us as First Nation leaders. So is that an example where our country's broken because
Yes.
we are dominated by special interests and we just can't work as a team? We
Yes.
just have everybody saying, "Oh yeah, let's go forward," but let's all rise up and say stop.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. I mean, so let me be clear. I don't think that there are any realistic prospects, certainly in the short term, for Canada to be able to fix itself. There's just no
Mhm.
will to do that, and the problems are very, very deeply embedded, including the ones that you're talking about. The problem that began with the Supreme Court deciding that there was a duty to consult embedded in Section
Mm.
35 of the Constitution Act, which is now evolving into almost a veto over economic activity. I have argued that should Alberta become an independent country, that Aboriginal rights should not exist in that country, for the reason that if you are imagining the country as a free country, subject to an actual rule of law, that means that the law applies the same way to everybody, that everybody has the same rights and freedoms as everybody else. And part of the special status that has grown for Aboriginal people has acted to their detriment. If you look at the situation of many Aboriginal people, it is not better than the mainstream. It is worse. Why is that? Well, because they are subject to group rights, and those group rights are under the control of their elites and also government elites. So they are being kept down by their special status. So it would be in everybody's interest, except for those elites, to start again and say, look, no, in a free country, the law applies the same way to everybody. Everybody has the same rights. Now, Aboriginal people actually do have all the rights, the full rights of a Canadian citizen right now. But in these particular interests, whether it's reserve land or whether it's Aboriginal title or whatever the right is, the right and benefit is, it is a collective group right, which makes it impossible for them to exercise their own individual preferences over it. And
Okay, so
that,
just to clarify that, Bruce, you're saying let's move beyond the Indian Act where it
oh
framed
yeah,
up a lot of these rights as groups rather than individuals that empower everybody, including our citizens, Aboriginal brothers and sisters. So let's move forward instead of backward.
one of the
Is that
things,
it?
one of the advantages that Alberta independence would provide is the ability to say, we do not want anything to do with the Canadian Constitution. We are going to start again. We're
Mm.
getting rid of the charter. We're getting rid of the Westminster system of government. We're getting rid of Section 35. We're starting again. We have to do what the Americans did after the revolution, which is to decide anew how we're going to govern our country. We're going to maybe take good things that we see, hopefully from the American Constitution, but that Constitution is not perfect. So we're going to also sit down and think, all right, well, how could we make it better? How do we make a free country in which we prevent the government from being able to do what it's done to Canada, which is take over to become a managerial state where all of our expectations are being defeated all the time, and there seems to be nothing that we can do about it.
Wow. Well, what do you think about that, audience? That is really quite a summation from our friend, Professor Bruce Pardy. Um, so the other topic here relates to China. Um, I, I know a number of officials within the Trump administration, and certainly it's been well articulated publicly, that one of the concerns they have about Canada is that we've been kind of a soft backyard, if you will, where
Yes.
the Chinese have been exercising significant influence within the relationships within Canada. We know that we obviously want to work with China under certain circumstances, but we have a lot of issues, whether it's money laundering, related drug production, all kinds of issues with China that we could talk extensively about. And I've talked with him about our associate Scott McGregor is one example when he talks about the so-called effect of Canada essentially becoming a vassal state of
Right.
China, where so many of our elites are tied in directly or indirectly with China. And I know this sounds hard to believe, but there's all kinds of documented concerns and evidence about certain officials, frankly, being tied in pretty close with the Chinese government. And so, is that part of the dynamic that Canada has been vulnerable to that kind of, well, foreign interference and influence?
Yeah, 100%. And it could well be one of the reasons that the American administration is looking at us more closely. I mean, they may
Mhm.
see us as a growing risk. For a long time, we've been a sort of a friendly, harmless country on the northern border.
Mhm.
Didn't really pose a threat. Now we're beginning to pose a threat because we've
Mhm.
been infiltrated in the way that you're describing. And who really knows exactly to the extent of the problem? But there's been lots of indications that there is one for sure. Maybe we're just so used to being a colony that we need to be a colony of somebody, and China now seems to be the choice of least resistance.
Mhm.
This is a tremendous problem, and when your own leadership, your own government seem to be compromised,
Mhm.
especially when you don't know to what extent that's true. Your whole future is in question because now you're not making decisions yourself.
Mhm.
Somebody else is maybe making them for you, and confidence in the whole thing starts to dissolve. So 100%. And again, I'm have to go back to this. If this is a problem in interference in Canadian governance in all different kinds of
Mhm.
ways, then Alberta breaking free is perhaps the best way to solve it, because then you're making a clean break. You make a clean break and you start again. At a certain point, you make such a mess inside the country, you can't clean it up. It's impossible.
Mhm.
And we
Indeed.
may be at that moment already in this country.
You really wonder. It's interesting. Kenzie Kraken says that Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, was pretty clear that they considered Canada a threat, and that was
Yep.
just
Yep.
issued
Exactly.
last week.
Right.
Now, another related file, which I'm curious then, given all the above, what lens do you see this through? And that would be the immigration file. We notice that our country has truly been inundated with millions of immigrants in Canada. We know that immigration is important, but it's how it's managed is the issue. We know this. But the numbers have been truly at record levels in the stratosphere compared to historic levels, well over a million every year. And the flows continue to be very high, whether it's in different forms, whether it's refugees, whether it's permanent residents, whether it's how they've redefined the family classification and age and even health condition, and also, of course, temporary visa holders. So, how do you see that file, Bruce? Like, is it another example where it serves a certain interest group to have such large measures of immigration? How is it really serving Canadians?
You have to wonder, don't you? The other possibility is that it's almost culturally suicidal. And a lot of Canadians don't realize this because we don't have a media that exposes it. Not a
Mhm.
mainstream media anyway, not a
Yes,
legacy
yes.
media, right? Um, on the CBCs and the CTVs and the globals,
No, they're silent.
this story is not covered. But in
Mhm.
fact, it sounds like the problem in Canada over a period of time has been as big or greater than the crisis in the US. And they now
Indeed.
have a
Yeah.
they
The
now have an
scale.
administration in the US that, is acknowledging the problem and
Mhm.
trying to do something about it. That has not happened here. Another again, going back to your Saskatchewan meeting, one of the things that was not discussed was that, which means that there is no inclination on the
Mm.
part of our leadership to even identify the nature of the problem. They're very happy to talk about housing and cost of housing, but they're not willing to associate that problem with the actual problem, which is too many people too fast.
Indeed. Yes. No, I think that's a very good observation that that wasn't really a top of mind issue. And yet that's impacting every Canadian as people, understandably, if they're new to this country, are seeking housing benefits. They all get a health card. As we again just saw a report that came out again this week showing that there are record numbers of waiting lists within our healthcare systems. I mean, it's not a mystery, is it, Bruce?
This is the thing. It all makes perfect sense. I mean, the whole thing makes sense. In other words, how could we expect anything else? I mean, it defies logic. I mean, you're putting two problems together now. You're putting together the sort of open border problem,
Mhm,
along with the idea of the healthcare system that we have. With
mhm,
it, and I've long said that the healthcare system in Canada is abysmal. It's abysmal because it's built on the wrong idea, and the idea is in this country, you're not allowed, you should not be allowed to
mhm,
obtain your own healthcare through your own means. Okay,
mhm.
that is not a free country. And again, if Alberta goes its own way, I would like to think that one of the first things that Albertans would decide is that that is intolerable. If you're going to have a free country, a new free country, then one of the first things to go is a socialized system of medicine, and that's what it is.
Okay, very interesting. So we're kind of near the end of our discussion. There was a very interesting bill that was introduced, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, Bruce, but it was called Bill C2, a bill for a stronger border act.
Yes.
I have not had an opportunity to review this 155-page document. It's on my to-do list, but is that a bill that you think has any substantive opportunity to, frankly, improve the management of our borders if we don't, in fact, confront the issues of these larger macro numbers that make our noses bleed?
So far, I haven't um, examined its details except for this one, and it's a very concerning one. Somebody brought this to my attention, something that's buried in C2, and that is part of C2 is to outlaw any cash transaction over $10,000. In other words, part of the agenda of C2, part of the agenda of the government in putting forward C2 is to restrict the use of cash. That has nothing to do with the border. What they're doing now is putting down the screws on all of us, Canadian citizens included, and saying, you're not allowed to use cash. We want to track what you're doing. And the excuse is, well, we're really tracking, people who are here illegally, who want to, prevent money laundering, yada, yada, yada. This has the effect of diminishing the ability of free people to use the cash that they own. And it's a measure through the back door. And this is exactly the kind of thing that you'd expect from this regime that we've had here for a long time.
Okay, so let's look at Bill C2 with some skepticism. And that's a very interesting point that I wasn't aware of. So thank you, Bruce, for bringing that to our attention. These are very important initiatives. And I think it's also in the context, Bruce, that we do not have a transparent written budget at this point. We know that our deficits look like they're even higher than they have been, which is very concerning, certainly from my perspective, in terms of both deficits, debt, and the like. What's the significance of not having a budget until what will likely be, I'm not clear, is it in the fall or even later, Bruce?
Part of the problem here is we're dealing with parliamentary convention and not strict letter of the law. But there was a time when parliamentary convention was thought to be very important. But what you have here reflected is the evolution of the thinking about how our governance system is supposed to work. This is back to my theme of managerialism. If you are a set of managers, then Parliament is just a bother. It's not that important. That's not where the real work is being done. The real work is being done in the back rooms, doing the bean counting. And because we are the managers, we are the ones that know what to do, and we'll do it. And we'll get back to reporting to you when we get around to it. But that's not the really important thing. And that is the attitude that you're seeing more and more. This is not the first time. It may be an extreme instance of it, yes, but it's not the first time that governments have tried to get around the nuisance of a legislature, because that's what it's become in the minds of people who rule. They think their job is to manage, and legislatures get in the way of that job. We have to eliminate that idea and bring them back to the idea that the people, well, see, this is the thing. The people rule. The idea in the United States has always been that the people rule. Now, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But that's the idea. In Canada, the Crown rules. And yeah, we get to elect people to a House of Commons. But notice not to the Senate. And it is the Crown, finally, that has the authority. And so we are a tangle of different ideas, and the Democratic one is not the first one, and it's not the one that's prevailing right now.
Well, Bruce, you've certainly challenged us today to think through what's happening before our eyes, and to think about, well, the importance of empowering the people, empowering Canadians. And I like that theme a lot. It strikes me that that is a seminal good principle in good public policy. It's not just about accountability and transparency. It's about subsidiarity, pushing power to the people. So I want to thank you very much, Bruce, for joining us for this far-reaching conversation, and earlier, Dan McTeague, and thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure, David. Thanks for having me.
Well, we'll look forward to our next conversation, Bruce, and also with our audience. A huge thank you to all of you for joining us. We've had a far-reaching conversation. Please like it and share it. These are important issues, and so please join us every Thursday at the same time for a live discussion. Also, keep an eye open for every release on Tuesday when it comes to our recorded interviews and discussions about a myriad of topics. This past week, we just released I think a far-reaching conversation with the great Joel Kotkin about not only housing affordability, but the rise of neo-feudalism. Imagine that. So be sure to take that all in. It's all kind of consistent with what we've talked about today with Bruce Pardy. So thank you for joining us, and have a terrific week.
Thank you for watching